Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. I've recently read the news that physicists have been exploring a quantum effect that apparently links the choices we make in the present with past events. Now all of this sounds very woo-woo. If you know much about quantum physics, you'll know that is pretty woo-woo. What was that fella called? Heisenberg, one of the originators of quantum physics. He said, when you take the first sip from the glass of natural sciences, it will make you an atheist. But when you get to the bottom of the glass, God is there waiting for you. Now, I wanted to comment on this mainly because it really gets to the heart of a trap that modern man and the modern mind is in. We tend to view the world in a linear context. What's gone is gone. We make decisions now only towards the future. This isn't strictly true, and many a mystic throughout many a tradition throughout time have told us this. And I think this is the first thing to say. This will be deeply challenging if you're not open to the spiritual dimension. But this is that we can't trust the mind with absolutely everything. Modern man thinks we must trust the mind with absolutely everything. He thinks the mind is the solution to everything. If we can just be rational and reasonable in a fundamental level, we'll figure everything out. I.e., we've confused what we think is the solution for what is really a trap. This is often referred to as scientism in traditionalist circles, the belief that it can answer the deeper needs of the human soul. Roger Scruton put it rather beautifully in his criticism of this. Brain scans cannot tell us what love is. And that really is what this research is pointing to. There is something greater than the scientific method out there. And if we can't entertain that idea, we'll always be trapped in modernism. I think you can take it as read. I'm not saying here that intellectualism, that the scientific method has no place. Far from it. We can all see it's an incredible thing, a wonderful thing. The traditionalist spiritual teaching would say something more like it needs to be organized correctly. We need to understand, as Shakespeare said, forgetting which play it was exactly, that there are more things than our philosophy can possibly imagine. Was it more things in our palm or something like that? Sorry, my Shakespeare is obviously very rusty. But I wanted to quote from C.S. Lewis. You might remember I'm quite a big fan of C.S. Lewis. And he spoke about this in one of his works, obviously many, many years, maybe 100 years before this research. Quote, "This is what mortals misunderstand. They say of some temporal suffering no future bliss can make up for it, not knowing that heaven, once attained, will work backwards and turn even that agony into a glory. And of some sinful pleasure they say, let me have but this, and I'll take the consequences, little dreaming how damnation will spread back and back into their past and contaminate the pleasure of the sin. Both processes begin even before death. The good man's past begins to change so that his forgiven sins and remembered sorrows take on the quality of heaven. The bad man's past already conforms to his badness and is filled only with dreariness. And that is why, at the end of all things, when the sun rises here and the twilight turns to blackness down there, the blessed will say, we have never lived anywhere except in heaven, and the lost, we were always in hell, and both will speak truly." Magnificent stuff from C.S. Lewis. And of course what he's alluding to is something many of us on the spiritual path have experienced. I know I've had it in my life. Very horrible experiences, early life violence, mistakes I made, horrible things that were done to me and others I loved, things that I thought would really ruin me, and if I'm really honest, acted like demons inside of me. I'm not saying it's wrong to feel pain or be affected by the world, but how we respond to the blows of life really will define the outcomes of our life. For instance, I was a lost kid. I can't blame myself, but I didn't know how to deal with some of the bad things that had happened to me, and I made an identity out of the unfairness of it. If you knew what I'd been through, you'd be like me too. And I'd carry that around, I'd be upset when I'd see someone had a normal life, and I'd constantly say to myself this endless refrain, if this hadn't happened to me, maybe I'd be normal like everybody else. But instead I've got my excuse for the world, and boy did I dress it up. I got into left-wing radical politics when I was young. Really, it was just a way of attacking the world that I felt had hurt me. I pretended to be a great folk singer, even though I very much wasn't. in order to have an identity that could push people away. Really, it was a way of playing a role in the world which was somehow alien. I don't have to get on with life. But it all came back to this original wounding. I felt the world wasn't safe, I felt it was too dangerous, and I felt I'd been hard done by. So obviously I had to go through a major death and rebirth experience, which I'm sure you've heard in videos before, happened to me towards my late 20s. There were various iterations of it before that, going in the right direction, but the big one was that age 30 transition, which I'm very passionate about. For me, it was almost an introduction into manhood. Sink or swim. You have to jettison this identity and you'll grow into a man, or you'll hold on to it and you will die. And I'm not being OTT. I've had family members who passed on, friends who passed on. It can be rocky out there when you're falling into spiritual forms of hell. They can pull you in like quicksand. But I managed to go through this process, and just like C.S. Lewis was pointing to, could look back at experiences in my life. And yeah, I'm not denying that they were horrible, I'm not denying that they were hard, but I learnt that great spiritual truism. As Rumi puts it, the wound is where the light gets in. And it's a wonderful teaching that you find throughout time. Of course, you could even say the biblical image of Christ on the cross is a classic image of that. The deep pain, the torture, the hell of life, the total unfairness of it all. But it's transcendent in a sense. It's the cruelty of the world is overcome and the soul is released to its true state, if you will. Deeper realization is on offer. And that is the great spiritual motif that's at the heart of the Christian tradition. But of course, you do find it in other places. I think, you can take it as read. A lot of the Christian tradition has been deeply disturbed in recent years. It's basically become a vehicle for liberalism and social justice ideology on the one side, perhaps too much religious literalism on the other, puritanicalism and so on, which you could say aligns with this very modern scientism we have. Everything is in the mind. But I think what C.S. Lewis is talking to here, what the quantum physicists are talking to here, and what the great spiritual masters have been talking to here, is there is something within you which is beyond the mind. There's a knowing, there's a wisdom. It's that wonderful teaching that call it consciousness or God or life, doesn't need thinking, but thinking needs consciousness. It needs the source of being to have its existence. And once we recognize that, we can sort of lay down our weapons, by that I mean the mind, stop fighting and allow that deeper wisdom to come through. So many wonderful examples of that we see on a daily basis. The tree shedding its leaves, the pigeon that you can drive miles away from its home. And I remember one thing they did on the BBC, they drove around these roundabouts miles away and let the pigeon go and it just flew straight home. How does it know? It doesn't sit there and do these calculations in its head. If I just look at the A46 and times that by the sun and its position, it's not doing that. It's the wisdom of life which is working through it. And again, there is a magical element to that. I'm not saying you'll be able to fly home. What I'm saying is there is a wisdom to us in our species, in who and what we are, which can be tapped into, which can change your past, your future, but most importantly, the here and now, which is the only place we truly exist. We need to get back to these things and out of our own ideas of life, because they'll always pull us back in to hell eventually. Might not seem like it at the time, might be met with fool's gold like C.S. Lewis pointed towards, might be that one pleasure. I'll pay down the line for that pleasure, but it gives you that escapism. But we have to start learning the truth, healing, love, potential. It's all in you here and now. As the great Christian teaching goes, your sin can be overcome if you dive deep into the tradition and do the spiritual work. With that, things can happen which you can't even believe. We have to take off the shackles of our own mind. Peace be with you, friends. Do join the Substack if you wish to connect with me. I'll hold the monthly call soon, so do come along to that if you're a member. On top of that, do subscribe to this channel and do enjoy the rest of your day.